1943, the Second Great War rages across Europe. As great empires clash and cities fall, a secret conflict is fought behind the shadows and the flames. A clandestine agency dedicated to unleashing even deadlier weapons on an unsuspecting world. They must be stopped, or the war may never end. Silent Storm is a third-person, turn-based tactics game where you control a squad of international Special Forces soldiers who travel around Europe and Western Russia, getting into extended firefights with squads of Nazis in an effort to find and put an end to a secret society that's trying to build weapons of mass destruction to conquer the world. At the start of the game, you'll create your squad leader by picking your nationality, appearance, and class. After the introductory mission, you'll be given a small base of operations where you can pick your soldiers that you want in your squad and load them up with various weapons, ammunition, first aid kits, and grenades. Interestingly enough, you can choose to play as both the Allied and Axis forces. Mechanically, this won't change much in the actual game, although it will influence what soldiers you can add to your squad and what their starting equipment will be. The troops that you can select from come in one of 6 basic classes, each one with a different specialization, such as Sniper, or Grenadier, or Medic. Once you've picked your squad and their loadout, you can head to the world map and pick the mission that you'd like to attempt. Each of the game's missions takes place on its own individual map, where you'll be given objectives such as find and capture enemy intelligence, find and eliminate enemy targets and personnel, or rescue captured allies.
Thank God! You certainly took your time.
Yes, my apologies. We ran into a war along the way.
Now, the game has a slightly non-linear campaign structure, where completing a mission will open up one or more other missions at different locations, at which point you're free to choose when and where you would like to go next. At any point between missions, you are free to return to your base to rearm your soldiers, or to take on small side challenges by finding and eliminating randomly occurring enemy patrols.
I sensed there was another.
Now, the real draw of Silent Storm is the game's combat. At the start of any mission, you'll be presented with a 3-dimensional map representing your current location. Your squad is free to move around this map in real time. However, once an enemy has been encountered, the game switches over to turn-based combat. At this point, you and your opponents will take turns moving around the map and attacking each other. How it works is each character has a pool of action points, and every action they take, from shooting to moving to reloading their weapon, costs some of these points. Managing your characters is important, as certain actions can take more or less time depending upon your choices. For instance, a character that is crouching presents a smaller target, but will spend more points on movement compared to a character that is running. During battle, clicking on an enemy soldier will instruct your characters to attack them with their currently equipped weapon. The accuracy of any attack you make changes based upon how far away you are from your opponent, as well as the type of attack you are using. Characters equipped with weapons such as rifles and carbines can actually spend more action points each turn in order to increase the accuracy of their shots. Whereas characters with weapons such as machine guns will always have low accuracy, but make up for it by firing multiple rounds per attack. Now, in addition to budgeting your action points, there are 2 big things that affect the overall strategy of Silent Storm's combat. The first is how the game handles your squad's perception. You may have noticed by now that the maps in Silent Storm tend to be large, open, multi-level environments, where, critically, there is no fog of war obscuring your vision. Enemies, however, don't show up until they're within your character's direct line of sight, and that by itself is not so unusual, but Silent Storm also adds a second way of detecting opponents. That, in addition to visually identifying enemies, your characters can also detect people by the noise they make. Essentially, if one of your soldiers hears somebody on the other side of a door or a fence, they can point out the general area where they believe that individual to be. It's not super accurate, and you won't be actually able to see the opponent's exact position, but it allows for more organic observations, as you can keep track of enemies and sometimes the civilians that are around you as well, even if they're not in your direct line of sight. Now, the second and more dramatic of the game's features is that Silent Storm also includes Destructible Terrain. Essentially, all of the doors, windows, fences, and even most of the buildings that you see on a map can be destroyed if exposed to enough firepower. And this has a huge impact on the game's overall strategy. Explosive weapons such as grenades and rockets can cause collateral damage and actually remove valuable cover from the environment. Alternatively, you can use this system proactively. It's perfectly acceptable to shoot locked doors off their hinges or use explosives on buildings to create new points of entry. At one point, I was fighting a group of Nazis who had entrenched themselves in a nearby building, and instead of getting into a protracted firefight and putting my soldiers at risk, I decided that the best course of action was to start throwing explosives at the building until I literally tunneled through to the other side. This whole system even has really great synergy with the previously mentioned way that the game handles enemy detection. The most basic example is if you hear an enemy moving around on the other side of a wall, there's no reason to run around and try and find them, simply fire through the wall and hope for the best. The game also has light RPG mechanics. As your characters battle and defeat enemies, they will gain experience, which will slowly over time improve their skills. Eventually, they'll even level up, which will allow you to select class-specific perks for them, which will further enhance their abilities. Okay, so what's the good, what's the bad, what's the weird? Well, for starters, the game is tons of fun to play. The combat system is great. It's one of the few games I've ever played that really captures that excitement of being in a minute-to-minute firefight, of being in a situation where bullets are whizzing by and glass is shattering and you're constantly having to balance the risk and reward of when to move and how to shoot. It's great stuff. The presentation is also quite strong. Building and character models look good. The game has a decent soundtrack as well, and the weapons in particular both look and sound fantastic. Plus, the destruction physics work pretty well in practice as well, and over the course of a battle you'll slowly see the environment get more and more scarred with bullet holes and blast marks. Although I do have to admit that the Metropolitan Maps look a lot better than the countryside maps, and trying to play any map with foliage turned on is an exercise in frustration. Now, while the combat is great, I do have to admit that the game falls short with most of its secondary systems. They are either poorly designed and implemented, or ultimately irrelevant. For instance, at the start of the game, you're allowed to pick the character class for your squad leader, who is your own personal character. However, during the actual game, if your squad leader is ever knocked unconscious, it is an immediate game over. which means that you basically better pick the sniper or medic class or get used to quick saving every turn, as you cannot put your squad leader into any kind of dangerous situation. Another thing is that the game includes a Familiarity Subsystem. With this system, if your character equips the same weapon repeatedly, they will eventually build up affinity for that weapon, which will allow them to get better performance out of it. There are two problems with this system. First, affinity takes forever to accumulate, which means that you will probably never see any long-term benefits over the entire course of your playthrough. And two, the game is constantly introducing new weapons and equipment, which means that you are disincentivized to use the same gear over and over. But probably the best example of poorly implemented and infuriating design choices is the game's stealth system. You see, Silent Storm actually includes an entire subsystem where your characters can hide and then sneak around the map in an attempt to quietly eliminate enemy soldiers using either knives or silenced weapons. And it's just a nightmare to try and use, because the game provides you with no feedback. You have no information on enemy sightlines, or patrol patterns, or illumination levels, or how much sound your character is making, because enemies can also detect you by the noise that you're making as well. And because it's all based around your character's stealth skill, it's a complete crapshoot whether it even works or not. Ultimately, just coming down to pure RNG to determine whether or not your character gets spotted.
Luckily, it just grazed me.
So I talked about the good, I talked about the bad, but why did I mention the weird? Well, it's because there's something weird about Silent Storm. It's not exactly positive, it's not exactly negative, but it is something that drastically alters the game's overall design and strategy. It's also kind of a spoiler, which is a weird thing to say for a strategy game, but bear with me here. Essentially what happens is, over the course of the game, you're chasing this secret society as they're trying to build super weapons to take over the world. About midway through the campaign, you will eventually discover that they have been building Panzerkleins, or walking tanks, which are essentially suits of powered armor. You'll even be able to capture some of these suits and utilize them for your own squad, and as soon as you do, everything about Silent Storm changes, because Panzerkleins are, well, they're kind of awesome. Sure, they're slow as molasses, but they're also armed with heavy cannons, rocket launchers, and even railguns. Not only that, a Panzerklein is basically impervious to small arms fire, which basically means that you can wade through entire squads of enemy soldiers and ignore anybody not holding a bazooka. Panzerkleins are awesome. They're just so much fun to use, but frankly, they're kind of too awesome. Because as soon as you unlock them, the game's dynamic completely changes. All of the strategies and tactics that the game carefully established in the first half, they're just gone. Entire categories of weapon become instantly useless. There's even this soldier class called the Grenadier, and their whole thing is that they throw grenades really well, and the Grenadier basically becomes irrelevant at this point, because there's no reason to have a guy really good at throwing grenades when you can just mount a rocket launcher on the side of a mech suit. And like I said before, it's not exactly good, it's not exactly bad, it's still very fun. But as soon as you unlock Panzerkleins, everything is different. Essentially, the second half of Silent Storm is a completely different game from the first half, and that's not exactly terrible, but it is confusing at best. In the end, I would love to give Silent Storm 3 out of 4 stars, but I'm not sure that I could recommend it. The core gameplay, the shooting, and the tactical combat, those are a lot of fun, but it has too many messy subsystems to really be exceptional. And even if you were interested, you deserve fair warning to know that the game's strategy changes dramatically in the second half. Still, in the end, I suppose I would recommend Silent Storm to anybody looking for a more visceral and destructive turn-based tactics game. Alright, well, thanks for listening. Till next time, have a good war. Zutalos, I see that you have been injured on the battlefield. Do not be afraid. Je suis là pour te sauver. I will simply lift up your body, cradle you in my arms, and carry you away from this dangerous battlefield. Merde. Do not worry, I'm a trained professional. Those bones will grow right back. Tight squeeze. Okay, watch out on the left there. Yes, have no fear. I am definitely a doctor. Yeah. Just gotta make it through here into this dark alley full of dead bodies and explosive fragments. And just going to lay you down on the cold, hard ground, and there we go. Very soon you can look forward to being not dead.